whole bunch of questions.
Well,
And,
do we, one at a time, speak one
well,
at
we'll
a
see. We'll see how it goes.
Okay.
And I'll just ask, and then first of all, you can say hi to Jake. Say hi.
What?
If you could say hi to Jake, since this is for Jake. Hi and happy birthday, Jake.
I should do it now?
Why not?
Yeah. Hi, Jake. Nice to welcome you into the family.
Yeah.
You're the first great-grandchild that we have, and we're glad to have you.
Yeah, that makes 3 of us. What I wanted to do was kind of give Jake an idea of his family, where he came from, and all that sort of stuff. And now I know a little bit about your father and your mom, but I don't know anything about your mom and dad, and I don't know anything about your grandparents. So I was wondering if you would.
My grandparents, I don't know anything about them except.
Really?
They were gone when I arrived.
Mm-hmm. No, you can do that. That's fine. Be comfortable.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Let's see. Do you want the date of when I was born and like that?
Sure.
Well, the date I was born was the January the 6th, 1904.
Mm-hmm.
And I was born in a country that I'm not too proud to talk about. It's a country that was run by the Tsar, Nicholas the Tsar at the time.
Mm-hmm.
At this time, he was executed by the communist government.
How old were you when that happened?
The question is what?
How old were you when he was executed?
When I left the country, it was in 1911, and I was about 6.5 years old, and I came here to Ellis Island on a steerage ship, and that was considered a pretty good trip.
Yeah.
It was later on a war developed in 1914.
Before you go on to that, I'm going to get to the wars and all that sort of stuff, but let's start like kind of in the beginning. You had how many people in your family? How many kids in your family?
There were 9 of us in the family.
And did they all come over? Did they all come over with you?
No. I had a brother that came in there first. He came here about 1906, I believe. And we followed after that in 1911. And another brother came here about 1908. And the rest of my family came after that. We traveled, and there was 7 of us. 5, no, there was 9. There was 9 of us rather, including one mother and father.
Right.
7 children and the parents.
Wow. And how about you, Grandma? What was yours like?
I was born in 1908 in a little town in Russia called Trochenbrod. And I came to this country in 1912. My father had come to this country 2 years before that, and he established a cleaning business in New York, which later turned out to be a very prosperous laundry in New Jersey. My mother came over here with 5 children. I was the youngest one, and my sister Lillian was the oldest. She was 12. We settled in...
And you were 4, right?
I was 4 years old then. We settled in a little house in Jersey City on Maple Street. I remember that. And that was my grandparents' home. We lived there for a little while, and then my mother and father and the 5 kids moved over to an apartment house. Nowadays, you would call it a tenement.
Oh, really?
But in those days, it was still an apartment house.
So tell me about your grandparents. I don't know anything about your grandparents.
My grandparents, I didn't know very well. My grandmother died soon after we came to this country. And I remember just once being with her, and she gave me a penny, and I thought that was so wonderful. But then she died soon after, and my grandfather...
This is your mom's parents or your dad's parents? Your mom's parents or your dad's parents?
My father's parents. My mother's parents, she only had a mother, and we left her in the old country in a little house just as we left, and she didn't like to see us go because she said we would never see her again, which we never did.
Yeah.
My father's parents, as I said, my grandmother died soon after, and then My grandfather didn't live very long,
Mhm.
so I really never had any grandparents.
Mhm.
We lived in, after this tenement house, we moved to a really, what was supposed to be in those days, a grand house. It was called Wegman Parkway,
Uh-huh.
which was a very good street.
This is where? This is where?
This was in Jersey City,
Yeah.
Wegman Parkway. And I lived there until I got married in 1932
To Grandpa.
to Philip.
Now, I want to know, let's go back just a little bit. I've always been curious what it was like coming over, like on the steerage ship, what that was like for you, for the two of you. You obviously came separate times and had different experiences. I'll start with Grandpa and then I'll...
Okay.
What was your experience like on the ship and then when you got to, you know, to New York and all that sort of stuff?
What did you say?
What was your experience like on the
steerage.
ship coming over?
What was my experience on
Mhm.
a ship?
Mm-hmm.
Well, it was quite an experience for me. Being about 6.5 years of age, it was an experience I never had before. When I got to the ship, they told me, I'm scared of it actually, but they told me this is only a visit to get us acquainted with the ship.
Mm.
But that was not true at all. That was the comedy of it all. After I got on and got into the hammocks, everything else was forgotten, and then it was time to experiment.
Mm.
And so my brother Harry and I went out on board. We were at that time in the steerage, so we had to climb the stairs to get up on a deck.
Now, before explain to me and to Jake what steerage means, what that means by steerage.
Steerage?
Yeah.
Well, steerage is the place upon which is at the bottom of the ship.
Yeah.
And the only part of the ship that you see, the ocean, is just about above the waterline. That is the steerage compartment. Very few that I knew who entered into the first or second class on the ship. So it didn't make any difference to me. At that age, everything was first class.
Right. Okay, so you said you were experimenting and you climbed up to the top of the deck.
When we got to the top of the ship, we were experimenting prior to that about water, how to get water. And so when I was up there looking around, I saw a valve, and I turned the valve, and as I turned the valve, they started to whistle like crazy. And so I ran back downstairs, got into bed, and hid myself until somebody came and stopped and turned the valve off. It was a pretty scary thing.
Oh, man. So now, how long a trip is it to come from Russia to, or was it to come from Russia
Well,
to?
the trip lasted 2 weeks.
Mm.
2 weeks. But at one time, in order to go to the bathroom, they didn't have any bathrooms up in the steerage area, so we had to go up upon deck, and there was a bathroom. And one day I went up on a ship, and it was a terrible storm there, and I had a hat on me, and the hat flew into the ocean.
Yeah.
But I was smart enough to hang on to the banisters so I would be consumed into the ocean. But I still yearned for the hat.
Now, do you remember the name of the ship that you came over on?
The name of the ship was Kursk.
Mm-hmm.
And during the wartime in 1917, it was sunk by the Germans.
How about that?
Gladly, I wasn't on it.
Yeah, that's right, Dan. Now, do you remember what it was like when you got to the, like, people tell stories about they see the Statue of Liberty and it was just kind of an unbelievable experience. I mean, do you remember that, or was it?
Yes. When at the viewing, as we approached the Statue of Liberty, everyone began to cry out, "There it is! There it is!" You know.
Mm.
I didn't know what they were talking about, but I saw it, and there it was. It meant very little to me, but everybody's talking about it.
Yeah.
So I guess this has been the history that was told to them back before they entered the ship
Right.
to the voyage.
So what about you, Grandma? Do you remember the trip at all over? Because you were only 4.
I remember just one thing. We also came in steerage, which, as was said, is the lowest part of the ship, and it is not very elegant.
Mm.
And we slept in berths, one on top of the other. And we were in the top berth, and there was a man underneath us, and I remember getting very sick right over the berth, right on top of the cement. That's all I remember, because I was only 4 years old. And the next thing I knew, we docked in Ellis Island. And Ellis Island was the entry place for all the foreigners. Today, Ellis Island has been reestablished, and it's a very nice place, but in those days, it wasn't so good. I remember sitting in like a cage, waiting for my father to pick us up. And I didn't even know what my father looked like, because when he left, I was only 2 years old, so I didn't remember him. But my brother pointed out to a man, and he said, "There's your father." So he took us, and then he took us to where his parents lived in Jersey City.
Right.
And I don't remember anything else about that until we moved into our apartment building. I started school in the 1st grade.
So now, before we go on, why did your families leave Russia? What was happening in Russia?
Well, my family left Russia because there was no opportunity, as my parents said, for the children to grow up as human beings.
What do you mean?
Because Jewish people in those days were not allowed to become citizens. They were not even allowed to leave the country. But when we left, we had to sneak across the border in the middle of the night.
What was that like? What happened? I don't know.
Well, I don't know. They had to cover me up and make sure that I wouldn't cry. And it was in the middle of the night, and I don't remember anything else until we got on board the boat.
Wow. Now, you had to change your name, didn't you, Grandpa? Didn't you?
Yes, yes. The changing of the name is a pretty tricky operation. The conscription to the service of Russia was a terrible conscription for anybody that was Jewish and felt that they ought to live a life of Judaism. You were not permitted to eat ham and the like of that, and that was quite a sin as far as an Orthodox Jew is concerned. So in order to avoid this, we had to have someone to take his place. At the time, our name was Khan, and somebody by the name of Blum was willing to sell his my father's share of serving in the army.
So he essentially bought his way out.
So my father was out and with a new name, and somebody else took his name and was serving in the Russian army. Now, this is something that most Jews dislike, going into the army, because there was a time when they put you into the army and discovered you were Jewish, they wouldn't let you out for 25 years.
Yeesh.
And can you imagine the woe of parents knowing that their son is gone for 25 years? It's just like he was never around anymore. And the Russian had a very nice way of doing it. They would send you to places like Siberia, where you could never get back. Recognizing that, my father realized that this was no place because of other boys in the family. And so he began to tinker how to get out of the country. So we decided to sell the houses. We have 2 houses and on a large acreage, which was had some agricultural value. So we sold the 2 properties and the small farm that we had, and that money was used to transport us out of the country.
So you were not really poor. You didn't like live in a ghetto or anything like that.
And one of the reasons why we stood so long into the country was because we were doing very well. We were okay.
What did your dad do?
We came to this country. I didn't know this, but my father had all that money in his pocket. And none of the children knew about that until we got here, and then we realized what happened. Because immediately when we got here, we started building a home, a house. We built a 6-family house at that time, and we were pretty well off. Pretty had a lot of money.
What did your father do?
He was a builder.
Oh.
Builder.
Yeah.
Carpenter and builder
Mm-hmm.
in those days. Did a lot of work in the town that we lived at, and he had connections with the county. He did a lot of work for the county also. As a matter of fact, he was one time involved with one of the royalty, and he had worked for them, and he built something for them, and the guy wouldn't pay him.
Right. This is back in Russia.
The prince wouldn't pay him. So my father was a man who observed the Sabbath, and the prince recognized that he would observe Sabbath, so they put the trial on for Saturday.
Mm-hmm.
Recognizing this, my father went to the rabbi and spoke to the rabbi about it, and the rabbi said it would be perfectly all right if you entered the courthouse and defended yourself.
Right. And he won, though, right?
And he won the
Yeah.
case, yes.
Yeah.
Right.
Now, I remember hearing, I don't know if it was, one of your families, was involved with the revolution. They kept guns on the table or something like that. Whose family was? What was that?
Yes. They had-
This is back in Russia again.
Well, since we had a large house, the days of conscription, people would come from all parts of the country to register. And when they came to register, they had to have housing. So where do they pack these guys? They put them in Jewish houses. They wouldn't put them in Christian houses. And my father had daughters, and that kind of scared him. Scared him to the point where we almost became revolutionaries.
Hmm.
Right. And this was probably the ticket that sent us to this country.
Yeah.
The guns and the table.
Yeah. Well, I don't want to talk about the table.
Oh, okay. All right. That's funny. We'll have to do that off the record, Jake. So now, okay, so then you came to the U.S., and now you wound up in Bayonne, right? Your
Yes.
family, and then Grandma's family in Jersey City?
Jersey City.
So what did you think of the country when you were, like, your first impressions when you first got? I remember a roller skate. So you saw a guy roller skating when you first got here, is that?
Oh, that was me.
Yeah.
That was me. Oh, that was me. When I first came here, my brother Maya took us home. When he took us home, it was on a train.
Mm-hmm.
And as I got off the train, I saw kids roller skating. And I never saw roller skating before in my life. And I would say, how can they skate here? There's no ice. It was surprising. So as I got closer to the boys that were roller skating, I recognized that was something that they had here that didn't have in our country.
Yeah. And what were some of your impressions, Grandma, like when you first got here?
Well, I
Or that
was
you
so
remember.
young that all I knew was that I was under my mother's care constantly. Started school in the first grade and continued on. And when we moved to Wegman Parkway, which was quite a nice move in those days, I transferred to a nice school. I was in the 4th grade at the time. And my brother Al also went to that school and was just around the corner from us. And we just all went through school, through high school and through college until I was grown, and after college I...
Where'd you go to college? That's unusual, right? I mean...
I went to Newark.
Uh-huh.
Newark Teachers College it was at that time.
Mm-hmm.
And I had to take a train to get there, and sometimes my father didn't let me travel alone. He would take me in his car. In those days, there weren't many automobiles around, but we were one of those who could have an automobile. Because when they went into the laundry business, it was called the Standard Laundry at the time, and we were quite well off, and we had an automobile. He would take me to Newark, which wasn't very far from Jersey City. After graduating from Newark, I got a job teaching and just did that until I got married.
So, what was for like someone like me or for Jake who, you know, wasn't around, you know, at 1920 or whatever, what was it like? What was it like to be in the United States? How is it different than it is, say, now? And how is it different than...
Well, of course, life was much slower then.
Mhm.
But how was it different? It was slower, prices were cheaper, but we didn't know it then because it was the general trend of things. We ate, we slept, we did our work. It was not a very exciting existence, but I didn't know any better.
Mm.
I knew that I had to pay attention to my parents, had to study, had to go through school, and it wasn't very exciting, but I didn't know any different.
Yeah.
Of course, when I was growing up, we had parties, there was dancing, and I remember I had a Sweet 16 party at my house.
Mhm.
And in those days, smoking was quite a thing. Everybody had to smoke, and I had a nice big party, and we had a dining room, the table was set, and I used paper plates. And my mother had her best tablecloth out on the table, and the boys had to smoke. And when they had to put out the cigarette, they put it in the paper plate, and my mother's best tablecloth had all holes in it. I was scared skinny, but what are you gonna do?
Yeah.
That was just it.
Wow.
And we went to dances, and I went out with boys, different boys all the time.
Now,
I went to up to the mountains, the Catskill Mountains, as a matter of fact, during the vacation, met boys there, and they came home to visit me, but never paid any attention to any of them until Philip came along.
all right. Now, wait, now, when you were dating, did you have to have like a chaperone, or did you have to have somebody accompany you, or were you allowed
Well,
to go
first
out?
I had to ask my mother if I could go,
Mhm.
and then it was all right. But that was also very unusual because I usually dated boys who lived in New York, and I was in Jersey City.
Right.
So they had to take the subway from New York to pick me up in Jersey City, and then bring me home, because we would go to a movie in New York or something like that. Actually, the Paramount was just in its heyday then, and we would go to the Paramount, which was a big deal. And then they
What
would
was
have
the
to
Paramount?
take me home to Jersey City, and they would have to go back on the subway to New York.
So if they wanted to hang out with you, it was a commitment.
Yeah, yeah.
So what was the Paramount?
The Paramount was, a very elaborate movie. In those days, they didn't make these little movies, two in one whole. It was a great big place. It was a palace. I think it was called the Paramount Palace. And it was the thing to go to the Paramount.
You dress up.
Oh, yes, we always dressed up. We never wore jeans or shorts or like sneakers. No, never. Yeah, as a matter of fact, when I started teaching, the kids could not come to school in jeans. There was a dress code, and they had to be dressed up, even in first grade.
Wow.
They had to be dressed up to come to school. And I always said, if you're dressed right, you will work right.
The secret of my success.
But we went through the normal and natural things of growing up. When we went away for the summer, I was always with my parents. I never went alone with the gang. I was always with my parents.
Where were some of the places that you would go for the summer?
We would go to the Catskill Mountains until we got a house in the Jersey Shore, and that was quite a thing.
So you were pretty lucky. I mean, you know, were pretty well off, and
We
you
were
had
pretty well
money.
off,
And,
yes. I would say I was pretty lucky.
You lived kind of almost
Right.
different than most people.
Right, yes. As a matter of fact, people would envy us, and they would call us the rich Hirsches, which we really weren't, but we were comfortable.
Yeah.
And my maiden name was Hirsch, and that was a very good name.
Ah.
We were called the Hirsches of Jersey City.
Nice. Now, Grandpa, what were some of the things that you remember, like early on when you first came to the country? What were your impressions?
I remember, I don't know.
No.
All I can really tell you about. I know I went to school in Bayonne, and all I remember was I spent a good deal of time in a gymnasium.
Mm-hmm.
I loved to play basketball at that time, and we'd spend hours and hours playing basketball.
Yeah.
And after Saturdays or Sundays, we'd find a place to play basketball since somebody else's make a makeshift basketball court, and that was beautiful. I had no restrictions upon my time. I could be out until 10 o'clock at night time and never be worried about. Conditions in those days were not like they were now. It was, you never heard about robberies. Rarely was a robbery ever made. And I guess it was because it was the years of immigration. There was a lot of influxes from Russia coming into this country. In the 20s, it was in the 1919 or 1917, right after the war was over, there was a terrible influx into this country. Or even prior to that, there was a lot of people coming into this country. They tried to get away from Russia because the opportunities were not there, and they recognized it. And as soon as anyone had any extra dollars, they would spend it for a ticket to this country.
Right, and then around that time too, there was the Russian Revolution and
That
Stalin.
followed 1914 to 1919.
Right.
But the revolution ended very quickly after it started. The communists were victorious at that time. I don't know what they call them, the communists or not. They had others.
Bolsheviks, they were called.
Yeah, I think it was Bolshevik. Communists must have come later on.
Yeah.
I think there are various factions. One took over the other at one time.
Right.
Various leaders. Trotsky was recognized as a great leader, and he was dumped, and somebody else came in and they were dumped.
Yeah.
I don't know about the history of these fellows.
Yeah.
We were too young to recognize any type of history.
Yeah. Now,
now, can you play this back?
yeah, sure.
It's all on record now?
Yeah.
Oh, boy.
Now, I want to know, now, did you have to work? Did you, like, was it when you were young? Did you work when you were a kid?
Yeah. I remember when I was 14, in the summertime, I went to work on a pier where they were parcels of merchandise which was bought in New York City that would have to be shipped to the various parts of the country. We worked there, and we did all the work that had to be done for recordings. I worked there in the summertime, and it was after we had them registered, we'd put them into the train, and it was shipped to the various parts of in various states. So I worked there for about 2 months at 14.
Yeah.
Pretty good.
Now, you guys talked about, like, anti-Semitism in Russia. Did you experience it here in the U.S. when you got here, or
did I recognize any?
did you? Yeah. Did you guys feel like you?
I did not recognize any, but I've heard a lot of talk about it. Yes, I heard a lot of talk about it. I heard enough talk about it to recognize that this was no place for us to be associated with. Yes.
How about you, Grandma?
And
Did you? I'm sorry. I mean,
when I got here, it was like a fresh of air to come to. It was beautiful. We loved it from the day we landed.
You did. You did. How about, did you experience any anti-Semitism in the U.S.?
A little, yes. My brothers had to go to Hebrew school, and the other boys, the non-Jewish boys, would throw stones at them and try to beat them up, and my mother had to take them all the time to school. As far as I was concerned, I didn't have any unpleasant incidents happen to me, but there was. In those days, people were simple. There was no such thing as drugs or drinking. The most adventurous thing that my friends did was to take a cigarette, and that was a big deal. But of course, there's always anti-Semitism. Even to this day, there is some. So it was more prevalent then, I would say. But now they have rules against things like that. So there isn't so much that you hear of, but there are still some.
Yeah.
But nevertheless, we got along.
Mm.
We went through school.
In those days, there were a different set of people in those days. You must recognize that these people came from various parts of the world to settle here, and they brought with them all the prejudices that they had in the other country. And it was inherent into the offspring to do as the parents had told them. I think, in my mind, that they got most of the stuff from the religion. The word Christ killer was very prominent. And I don't think the church did anything about that.
Mm-hmm.
As a matter of fact, my feeling has always been that they were instigators.
The church?
The church.
How do you mean?
The word Jesus Christ was prominent in the Christian's mind, that the Jews killed Christ. And this stuck in their minds, deep down in their mind. And the difference between people now and then is now that they're better educated and have more of an understanding. But at the bottom of the hearts, there's still a lot of prejudices. That has to be erased. But that takes a pretty long time.
Yeah.
That takes centuries to do that.
So now, tell me about how you guys met and got married.
I'm just going to say that. I was just going to tell you that there was an incident in relation to how I met Philip. We always, for the summer, we always had a house down the New Jersey shore. And this one time, my father was driving, and we were going up to Canada to a wedding, and we were driving home from the shore to Jersey City. And we were in a very, very bad accident. We had a new car that was 6 weeks old, and it was totaled. And my mother landed in a hospital with a broken leg and was there for several months. My father landed in a different hospital with broken arm or something, and I landed in a third hospital, and my eyes were injured. I couldn't see. I was totally blind for about 5 months, and then my vision came back to me slowly. Of course, I landed in a hospital, and at that time, I had just met Philip down at the shore. He came for a weekend and visited me. We went on a date down there, and when he heard I was in the hospital, he came to visit me. And he brought me flowers, of course, and a book, which I could never read. Anyway, from then on, he came to visit me when I came out of the hospital. He took me places when I was home because my mother was away in the hospital, my father in the hospital, and the only one to take care of me was my sister. She was busy with her family and with our family. And Philip took care of me. He would take me out, and that's how we got together, and it lasted, and has lasted now for 60 years.
Yeah. Now, I saw the video from the wedding. You guys get married in 32, right?
32.
So that's like the height of the Depression. And isn't Prohibition going on at the time?
Yes, that's
and
right.
And
that's
now
right.
there's,
That
everyone
was
looks great. You know, they
Yeah.
have the tuxedos on and they look
Yeah.
great. It's a big hall.
Yeah,
and,
yes.
and there's like alcohol on the table. How did you manage that?
Yeah, there was Prohibition on, but my father had a pull with the administration because of his business, and he got the liquor for us.
Yeah.
And what else did you want to know about the wedding?
Just, all the nice suits and the tuxedo and the big hall. And
Well, as a matter of fact, the wedding was held in an auditorium that was called the Gertrude Hirsch Auditorium, because that auditorium was named after my grandmother, my father's mother. And the reason it was named that is because the laundry that my father and his brothers owned contributed, what was it, $20,000?
$25,000 at that time.
To the building of the community center.
which then was
And
a
so
lot
they
of money.
named, in those days, oh yes, that was a great deal of money, and that's why they named the big auditorium the Gertrude Hirsch Auditorium, and that's where we were married.
Ah, okay. So, what did your families think of the wedding? Did your family approve of Grandpa? And did Grandpa's family like you? And
We
all that?
didn't know his family very well because, as I said, I was, in the hospital, and my parents were incapacitated, so we didn't know them very well. But They, you know, there was no objection to the wedding. As a matter of fact, Philip's father and my father were kind of buddies because they were friendly with the same rabbi. Was that the idea?
Siegel, yeah.
Yeah, Rabbi Siegel. So, you know, it was approved of very well. But we didn't get to know them too well because the first year we were married, Philip's father died, his mother died, and also a sister died that first year.
Bad year.
That was a bad year. The first year we were married, so we didn't know them too well.
Yeah.
Well, anyway, there were two different generations. Anyway, my father, it has to be traced back at the time of the Civil War, actually.
Is that right?
Yes.
Oh, wow.
Yes. You see, going back that far, there's a different atmosphere altogether. The world was different.
Mm-hmm.
You know, there's no automobiles. You know, there's nothing that you have today that they had at that time.
Right.
You live by horse and wagon.
Mm-hmm.
So it was a new world. The world was changing so rapidly.
Yeah.
The world changed tremendous at the time when we were young. From the period of beginning of the 20s, there was inventions that were made: radio, television, airplanes, automobiles. Everything was so different in the world.
Well, now tell me about. That brings me to something else I want to talk. Tell me about your impressions on some of the different inventions, and which ones were the most startling? Which ones were the most amazing to you?
I think the radio was the most startling because that was the one that came out first, and we had a radio. As a matter of fact, somebody that worked for my father made it for us.
That was a crystal radio, or was that a?
No, crystal. What one was a big radio?
Oh, you had a real one.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, at that time, the popular thing was crystal radio.
Yeah, but
crystal radio.
Which is just like a little tiny little thing, right?
The first time I heard it, I couldn't believe what I was hearing.
Yeah.
Where is this guy was talking? Another incident that I think ought to be recorded is television.
Right here.
We went to
The World's
Fair.
Yeah, went to the World's Fair
In New York.
in New York.
39 was that?
And
Yeah.
and at that time, television was so brand new that it was only exhibited at the
Fair.
at the fair. Yeah. And in order to show the television, somebody had to act to produce the picture. So Bebe.
Yeah, they had it, you know,
So-
around the grounds.
Yeah.
Who wants to do something?
So
of course I did.
in a studio where the television was at, it was on a flat surface. You could see the picture. You had to look down on it. It was on a flat. It wasn't like this. It was like that.
Oh, I see. Okay, see,
Flat,
like a
yeah,
table
yeah,
almost.
yeah.
So the fellow that was photographing asked who would want to volunteer to become a subject. So she volunteered to be a subject. And I was sitting inside or watching her on the outside, and it was fantastic. Fantastic. And I don't think there was ever a set out that we knew about.
No,
Nobody
nobody
had
had a set then.
Nobody had a set.
Yeah.
Following that, it became it became popular because they were already able to manufacture the sets and send them out to the stores.
Right.
Well, before that, though, a person who was a little bit better off than the others would have a television set, and then everybody in the neighborhood would come to look at the television
Sure, it was
set.
it was a new thing. It was wonderful.
Yeah.
It was unbelievable. As a matter of fact, when they told me that the TV was coming out, I said, it's impossible.
Yeah.
It's impossible. you can't transmit a picture from New York to New Jersey.
Well, we couldn't understand how they would be able to do the commercials, you know, because the commercial on the radio, people just spoke and you heard it. But how could they show something? I
Right.
couldn't understand how they could do that.
No, the transmission in those days was being developed, and the transmission could not go any further than, say, 100 miles. But
Yeah.
eventually, they built it up to where it is right now.
Satellites and stuff like that.
So it actually grew.
No, I'm sorry, am I interrupting? Were you about to say something?
What?
Were you about to say something? Did I
No.
stop you? Oh, now what about, I mean, in my life, you know, space travel became a reality, you know, and landing on the moon. What was that like for you? Was that also remarkable?
Never even heard about it. How, no, it was never even spoken of as far as I can remember.
Oh, space value.
Well.
So when it started, was it
Yeah.
just,
Well, do you remember when, in order to come down from the moon, they had to jump into the ocean?
Mhm.
You know, another thing. That was
Yeah.
very, very exciting. Yeah, that was new.
Yeah, but nobody ever landed on the moon in those days.
Not nowadays, no.
Not nowadays.
Well, he's talking about his period.
Oh, yeah,
His period.
well, yeah.
I mean, like when it first, when Neil Armstrong first landed on the moon,
Oh, well, of
what did you
course
guys think?
It was very exciting.
Well, now the
Yeah,
big thing right now is the computers.
Yeah, that.
That's a big and wonderful thing.
That is so new to me that I still do not understand the computer or faxing. That is beyond me altogether. Truly.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, a fax is something. That's marvelous.
Yeah.
Fax. You can typewrite a letter and send it any part of the country.
The world.
It's marvelous. You see, the thing of it is, it's only works where people need it. See, but when it comes to television and radio, that includes everybody in this country.
Yeah.
Well, that's the wonderful part about it. And the other is like only concerns certain people, so it's not that exciting.
Yeah.
But the television and radio is mostly exciting.
But we
Universal.
have been fortunate to have lived through all these new inventions and have enjoyed so many of them. So not many people have been as fortunate as we have been. And
I don't-
we're very proud about that and very thankful about it.
Yeah, I don't think that there's going to be, I mean, like another lifespan where there's going to be that many. I can't imagine. I mean, like going
Well, what
from
else can they imagine?
horses to cars to, you know, planes and trains and.
And I have to say something to Jake.
Yeah.
Jake, this is for you. You are my first great-grandchild, but I have had several grandchildren whom I love dearly and of whom I am very proud, and I have to mention them. My first one was Larry,
That's me.
and he has been my special from the day he was born until today. Then came Stephen, and he's another one of my favorites. Then I had Susan and David. And the 4 grandchildren are still special to me. And now that you are here, you are going to be the first great-grandchild who is special.
Now let's go, if we can. I wanted to talk, what was the Depression like for you guys? It was obviously different for you than for most people, right?
I was
'Cause
just
you were-
going to say,
yeah.
for me, the Depression didn't mean a thing, because we were always well off, and we were still well off, and I was not denied of anything because of the Depression. And people speak about the Depression, they couldn't have certain things. It never affected either me or my whole family.
Wow. Now, what about, like, I mean, people say, a lot of times they say, you know, conditions today in the 90s are kind of like the conditions were in, say, the 20s and 30s, or the 30s when the Depression, you know, a lot of homeless people and people like on bread lines and that sort of stuff. Is there a comparison, I mean, as far as you can tell, or just from...
I don't remember. I wasn't aware of it. The only thing I do remember is that in those days, we could get a bar of candy for a nickel. Like a Mars chocolate bar was a nickel. Now, what is it, 40 cents?
55.
45 cents, something like that. And everything else in price has gone up. And when we compare them, it's hard for us to believe that things have increased in price so much.
Yeah.
It was a lot easier to handle situations for the homeless then than what it is now. Because then you didn't need much. You could rent in those days an apartment for $10 a month. Whereas today, it could be anywhere from, I think it was $1,000 up. So it was easier at that time to take care of the indigent, of the poor people, because recognizing the times that these things do happen, there was always a society that looked after these people. And it was much easier. You could do a tremendous amount of good for a quarter you could feed a man for a quarter for full dinner. So even though the salaries were low, everything else was in proportion. And I think there's more feeling in those days about poor than there is today.
Do you think that, like, the politicians back then too, like, I mean, say Roosevelt and those people were better, you know, were more concerned, or do you think they were pretty much like the ones today?
Well, I didn't know much about the politics in those days. We only knew that President Roosevelt was a good man, and of course the Republicans didn't like him, but the Democrats, which we were, we thought he was pretty great.
Yeah.
Well, the man was so great in those days because he was elected 4 times to office, and never in the history of the country has anyone elected more than twice. And he was so popular that people wanted him. The reason why they wanted it because he had innovative ideas that never happened before. Took care of the Social Security. He guaranteed the banks. He originated the idea of government interceding by organizing work in the farms and on the highways. And these were something that was new. And during the course of his regime as a president, people saw the greatness in the man. Yeah. And that's the reason why he was elected 4 times to office.
And after Philip and I had been married about 8 years, we moved from North Bergen, where we first lived when we got married, and we moved into a house in Fort Lee, and we lived there for about 28 years. And both Robert and Betsy was born there, and Robert had been born 2 years before that. And we lived there for 28 years, and Robert and Betsy went through school there, and I taught in Fort Lee. And when we bought the house, we paid $8,000 for it. And recently, just about now, we visited the same house, and they were selling the house for $319,000.
There's your inflation.
Yes, your inflation. And they said that the house had been built in 1950, which wasn't so because we had bought it in 1940. And we had a good time there. We liked Fort Lee, and Robert and Betsy went through school there, and they grew up there, and it was a good 30 years that we lived there.
No,
I think you got enough on that thing now.
Have you got that finished yet?
I was hoping to go a little bit more, but if you guys want to like call it quits, then
No,
do you mind? Do you mind talking a little bit more? Do you mind talking a little bit more? I'll ask you a couple more questions. Do you mind if I ask you a couple more questions?
No, go ahead.
Okay.
No, I thought you were in a hurry.
No, not at all. Not at all.
Okay.
We got 2 hours of tape. We got only 48 minutes here.
Oh, okay.
So no, because I just wanted to kind of get a sense of, you know, this whole change, you know, and
Yeah, well,
what it's
did
been
we
like,
give
you
you
know.
enough of that?
Well, I was wondering, like what the '60s and the '70s was like for you guys, because I mean, you came from, you know, a much more
the
kind of.
'60s was when they had these what do you call them? What were they called?
Well, you
When
had the riots.
Yeah, the riots and the
and lootings.
What were these kids called that, you know, dressed?
Like the
The
hippies?
hippies, yeah, we had the hippies in the '60s. Of course, we didn't approve of them. That was way out of our consideration because the kids we knew, as we said before, they were easygoing, dressed nicely, and no riots, no
No disturbances. Well.
no, what I call it, the cocaine, what is that? No.
Drugs.
No narcotics.
No, yeah,
No
no drinking. They
Yeah.
were, so we were very upset with them, of course, but they didn't affect me in any way.
Yeah.
No, none of my children went into that sort of thing.
Yeah.
They didn't drink, they didn't have the drugs. They went through school, were good students, and that was all that mattered to me.
Yeah. Although, of course, I mean, my
Go on.
parents. I said, of course, my parents
Yeah.
You know, they were on the cusp of that. I mean,
Yeah.
you know, they got
I
involved with
said
it.
Betsy and Robin, yeah.
Yeah.
They were just growing up there, but I never heard of any wrongdoing with them.
Yeah.
They grew up, they went to high school in Fort Lee, and then they went off to college. After that, they were out of my jurisdiction.
That's right. That's when all hell broke loose
Yeah,
with them.
right.
And what about what are some of the things, I mean, like in terms of like the historical events that you've witnessed or that you've lived through? Like I've always felt that when Robert Kennedy was shot, I always thought that was like a really major
Yes, that was.
turning point
that
for
was.
me in my life.
I remember exactly where I was. I was in the classroom, and we got news that President was shot, and oh, everybody just went to pieces.
Yeah. For some reason, I always felt that like Robert Kennedy was even more of a turning point for say the country, because he was kind of the last in the line. It was John Kennedy and then Martin Luther King and then Robert Kennedy. Are there any events that you would point to and say, God, that was really a major kind of turning point for your life or for the country?
Was,
any event. I mean, maybe the president being shot, or maybe Watergate, or maybe.
Well, yeah, we lived through all that, but. You know, we read about it in the papers, we listened to it on TV, but how did it affect us personally?
Politics
Not
was
really,
not a great forte for us.
No.
We took politics as we saw it in the newspapers.
Yeah.
And because we were probably better off than most people, economically we were okay, so we felt nothing of what was happening outside of our sphere of friends. We read the newspapers, we heard about what was going on outside, and everybody did the best that they could for what was happening. Mm-hmm. Sometimes it wasn't enough, but who could be responsible for not being enough?
Yeah. But who
knows what enough is?
Were there any instances that, like when they happened, or now that you look back on them, you think, gosh, that really changed either your lives or changed the lives of, you know.
It didn't change our lives, because we didn't approve of them, of course. We didn't approve the hippies, we didn't approve of the riots. We said kids should go to school and do what they're supposed to do. That was our opinion.
Yeah, I'm not talking necessarily about the 60s, I'm talking about, you know, maybe something that happened in World War II, or maybe something that happened, you know, recently.
Well, my
maybe.
family was too young to, they were too young to go to the World War I and too old to go to World War II. Mm-hmm. None of the casualties affected us, affected me.
Yeah.
We didn't lose anybody. Philip's brother went to camp.
Yes,
That's all,
yes, and brother
Sam
was in the First World War. He was a soldier, and he was in the engineering department at the time. And when he was about ready to be shipped over to the other side, the war was over.
Lucky him.
So he didn't have any battles in that war. He had his training, he did his job, and he came home discharged honorably.
All right.
So that was the only incident we had in the First World War. In the Second World War, I was already too old to go into the service. Mm-hmm. I was registered, but was never called upon to enter for any sort of drilling. And so therefore I was not in the First World War, I was too young then, and too old for the Second World War. Mm-hmm. So the only thing that we did feel about the Second World War was that a nephew of mine was called to service, and he was a gunner in the Air Force, and his plane was shot down, and he landed in Germany and came back alive.
Really?
But to this day, he won't go in an airplane.
Hmm.
No. He was hit. Still has shrapnel in his legs.
Is that right?
Yes.
Wow.
The only hardship we had was that we had to do without certain things, certain foods, but you know, you get along without that. And then gasoline was
kind of hard to get.
Kind of hard to get. You had to have coupons for it, but you even managed with that. Somebody didn't use their coupon, they gave it to, you know, somebody who could.
Yeah.
So we had very little hardship. We had a pretty good
You
life.
had to work out it though. You had to,
Yeah.
had to work out it. Yeah, I don't think there was ever a time during that period where I couldn't get gas. I had to go hunting for it. A lot of the stations were out of gas, but when you heard someone had gas, you were down there in the line.
Yeah. Yeah. So now, what are some of the things that you'd like to tell Jake, say that the two of you, or individually or collectively, are really most proud of having, you know, accomplished?
What should he accomplish?
No, what are you proud of having accomplished in your lifetime?
I was proud of raising a good family. I was proud that the family is so good to us that we still stick together. We have nobody that won't talk to one another. The family still sticks to us, and they're very considerate of us. And what should I say to Jake? Jake, I would say, stick to the advice of your parents. Go through school, get your education, and
live a happy life.
Yes, and just be good, just like my family was.
Now, is there anything that, two questions. Is there anything that you would add to that? I mean, like anything that, like, some things that you're really proud of having done?
Well, let's see. Let's talk about Jake. Jake, the best thing you can do is to make yourself proud by going to school, taking care of your lessons, and becoming a somebody. And the only way you can do that, Jake, is if you go to school and pick up a profession of some sort. And I think with that program, you'll turn out to be a very happy man.
There's advice. Now, going back to your lives, is there anything that you say would have done differently if you had the opportunity, if you could go back to one point or some points?
Yes, I think I would have. I think I would have continued in my education further than I have gone on. At that time, it was very easy to pick up and enter into a business. All I had to do was have an initial capital and work from that initial capital and work yourself up to a larger capital. And once you're in the business, it was very difficult to leave that business because money was on your mind and you couldn't let go. So you dug in, but I think it was a mistake. First of all, in order to prosper, you have to devote a lot of time, and you have no time. And in the course of life, there are just steps that you have to take. You are young ones, and you are middle-aged, and then you become old age. And each of those steps has different functions. And if you miss that function, you can never get it back. So I would concentrate on going through those stages very carefully and see what it does for you and take advantage of it.
Do you think that you missed any of the stages, or you think that you...
What?
Do you think that you missed any of the stages, or you think you went through them?
That I missed any of the stages?
Well, either of you. You said there were you're young, and then you're middle aged, and then you're old. Do you think that you?
Well, I think I'm a middle ages, my young ages rather, was disturbed because I was very anxious to make money, and I didn't do the things that the other younger people do. I did not attend as many parties as I had wanted to. I didn't have the time for it. I didn't go to as many dances as I should have gone. Those are things that you miss.
Yeah. So get your dancing in, Jake. Were you going to say?
What I am sorry about, I don't know. I wonder if I could have been a better mother by being with my children more. But we tried to be with them. We went to their basketball games, to their football games. When Betsy was a cheerleader, we went to see her do that. did I spend too much time working? Or should I spend more time with them? I really don't know. I've often wondered about that myself. I wondered if Betsy resented my teaching. It has been in my mind.
Really?
I've often asked her that, and she said no, but it seems to me that maybe she did. Did Robert resent my being a teacher because I taught in the same school that they went to? And of course, the teachers and the principal knew them as being my children, and they would all report to me. Did my children resent that? I don't know. But it seemed to have turned out all right, so I'm glad about that.
Yeah.
And Jake, we hope that you will have the same kind, we know that you will have the same kind of an upbringing that my children had, and that you will turn out just as well as they did. And we wish you the best, and we love you dearly, even though we haven't seen you yet.
But you will.
But we will.
What were you going to say, Grandpa? You were about to say something?
I think I lost what I was going to say.
Is there anything, before you turn it off, is there anything that you wanted to talk about or that you expected to talk about when I told you about what I was going to do? Is there anything that you wanted to talk about or that you had expected to talk about
No,
before?
as a matter of fact, I didn't know that I would talk so much.
I could go on for hours, believe me.
Yeah. I think maybe I've said too much already.
No.
Yeah,
No, this is great.
I think you got a pretty good history of us. I don't think you can go much further than that.
We were pretty normal. They were not very eventful. We had both had good lives, and together, of course, it lasted for 60 years, so it's got to be good.
Something to it.
We're proud of our family, children and grandchildren, and great-grandchildren. So everything has turned out well.
Well, all right. Well, there you have it, Jake. Your great-grandparents. And as soon as I can figure out how to fade this thing, that's what I'm going to do.
You got more tape in there? I think you better pick it up with your mother.
Yeah, let them say how they like being in the family.
Okay. Oh, look at that.